well, why don't you look like them? Where are your real parents? What happened to your real parents? And they just kind of would poke and prod. And it wasn't all children, obviously, but there were definitely those kids who couldn't let it go.
This is the Adopted Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hey everyone, welcome to the Adopted Mom Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 15, and that means that it is the finale. I'm so excited to bring you guys the end of this awesome season. And this episode is part 2 of our series on race and adoption, and just how important that is when we have kids in our home who are different ethnicity than us, and we might not know exactly how to raise them to know who they are and appreciate their culture and their heritage and just everything like that. And I am so excited that we've gotten to talk to so far 2 really awesome people. And in this episode, we're bringing you 2 more. So we have Meloni Lee. And Meloni was born in Korea. She was adopted and raised here in the States, and then she grew up to adopt herself. So she married a Caucasian man, so they have 1 mixed race biological child, and then they have adopted 2 American Eskimo children. And so she has such an awesome perspective because she's seen both sides of this thing, and she has a lot of really awesome things to say. Up after that, we are going to be talking to Adriana. Now, Adriana is originally from Mexico, so she kind of split her adolescence between Mexico and the States. And so she fully understands the rich culture of just the Hispanic people in general, but mainly, of course, Mexican people. And she, especially in this area, so many of our adopted kiddos are from a Hispanic culture. And so she has really amazing advice and just great things to say about adoption in general, but specifically on how we can, better raise our kids from other ethnicities. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear from both of those incredible women. Before we jump in, I want to remind you guys of our sponsor for this month and the closeout of the season. And it's Christine Bauer with her book, Those 3 Words. It is a memoir about being a birth mom, and it is out of the park amazing, you guys. I always link to it in my show notes, or you can just go on Amazon and search for Those 3 Words by Christine Bauer. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys. I'll check in with you again at the end, but until then, thank you guys so much for listening to this whole season, and let's get to it.
People do not realize that they do hold racism and prejudice in their heart through different belief systems. We've experienced people making comments about maybe that educationally my Black children's future looks different from my white children's. Maybe behaviorally, like maybe it's expected that behaviorally my Black children should behave differently than my white children. And so it's never explicit. I've not experienced someone just blatantly, sharing, their opinionated selves of how my Black and white children are different from their perspective, but it comes out very indirectly in just comments that I don't even think that they realize that they have.
All right, guys, welcome to the Adopted Mom Podcast, and welcome to Miss Meloni Lee. How you doing?
Very good, thanks.
Good. I'm so excited to be chatting with you on such an important series, I feel like. And I feel like I'm learning so much as we go, and I hope my listeners are too. But yeah, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was adopted from South Korea in 1980, and my parents wound up moving up to Alaska from Minnesota. So I grew up in Alaska, where I met my wonderful husband. We went to high school together. And my parents are white. My mother actually passed away, my adoptive mother, and my dad remarried when I was 12. So I have white parents, myself, South Korean, and then they went on to have 2 more children. So my younger brother and sister are also white. So I definitely was noticed to not. One of these things was not like the other. Let's just say that. So my husband and I were married 10 years ago this year, And we have a mix of biological and adoptive children also. So 2 of our children are adopted. They're full biological siblings. And then we have one biological child.
That's awesome. I think it's really cool that your parents adopted before they had biological children. You don't see that very often. So that's really cool. Do you know why they chose to do that?
Well, I was the only child between my dad and mom. And so my dad had just me until I was 16 years old. And then at that time, he had remarried someone younger, and they went on to have children. So as I was headed off to college, she gave birth to my little sister, and he really started over.
Wow. Yeah, that's like going straight back to the baby phase.
And now that I'm a parent myself, I mean, I love my dad, and the energy he had to do that twice is incredible.
Goodness. And so how far apart are you from your youngest sibling?
We're 18 years apart.
Goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Whew. Yeah, your dad sounds like a saint. That's awesome. And so is your biological child the oldest?
She is the youngest.
Okay.
Yep. She was born after the other 2. And so we had 3 babies in 37 months.
Goodness, girl.
First 2 are 15 months apart, and the second 2 are 22 months apart. And so we went, I know your story, you.
Yeah, I feel you a little bit.
It's, it was a whirlwind.
Wow. That's crazy. Okay. So your kids are how old now?
They are 7, almost 6, and just turned 4.
Okay. Wow. So they're still, you're still definitely in like the kid season.
We are, but my husband and I smile, we high five, we have no diapers, no bottles, no pacifiers. So we have, we go to the pool and nobody needs a nap. So we are feeling on the upswing of freedom here.
What's that like?
It's glorious.
Everyone can feed themselves, and like when you go to a restaurant, you just like eat your own food and that's it.
It's just so
wow.
wild. We still have, because there's 3, we still have, people can't quite keep their fingers to themselves. And we were just at a restaurant on Sunday, and I'm like, hands in our laps, elbows to ourselves. But we've come further than we were.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a daily nobody touch each other, nobody look at each other talk with mine. And they're all like preschoolers, but they don't get it. And I have doubts that they ever will. So. But that's motherhood.
They will. My husband's the oldest of 3 that were all born a couple years apart, and he tells me all the time, it's normal, don't worry, because I was an only child, so I had no idea what siblings were like.
Oh, goodness. That's awesome, though. I love just chatting with other moms about like the stuff that we all have in common, and we feel like we're crazy, and then we're like, oh, you too? Yes. But yeah, back to your story a little bit. So you were how old when you came to America?
My parents adopted me when I was 6 months old.
Okay. So yeah, you definitely don't remember anything, but you weren't like fresh home from the hospital.
Correct. Yep.
So what was that like growing up with a white family and being, for most of your childhood or all of your childhood, really, you were an only child. And so it was definitely obvious that you were adopted. So I'm guessing your parents never had, a sit down conversation with you when you were 8 that was like, well, when you were born, we adopted you.
Right. I think that my earliest memories of my talking about my adoption and being made aware of my adoption came from other kids. I had a very loving, stable home life. My aunt, who has been a huge influence in my life, and I love her very much, loved me as her own and never made me feel like I wasn't one of her, girls when I was over there. So it was kids at school that definitely could be cruel and were quick to point out. And, now that I'm a mom and I have children, kids just are blunt anyways. But when you're different as a child, it's hard because different isn't always, different's really never good now that I have an elementary school child.
Yeah.
Being different is hard, whatever it may be, your shoes, your height, the color of your hair. So add in your parents looking different, it's challenging.
So what were some of the things that they would say that really stuck out to you?
well, why don't you look like them? Where are your real parents? What happened to your real parents? And they just kind of would poke and prod. And it wasn't all children, obviously, but there were definitely those kids who couldn't let it go. And even into adulthood, after we had our own children who were adopted, our precious babies have an older sibling in another family in another state. And when that sibling came to visit, we had some people in our lives and their children just could not understand adoption. And instead of the parents jumping in to help the conversation, I had to do it. As an adoptee, I had to come to her rescue because she was just sitting there getting peppered with these questions, unable to answer. You know, the kids don't always have all the information or the answers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
A lot of adoptive parents are doing a great job to say you were chosen, you were loved, and all of that is true. But kids can still get in there with unanswerable questions.
Yeah. We always, as adoptive parents, I feel like, especially as adoption is becoming more and more understood and accepted, we encourage the questions to some degree. So what are some of the age appropriate and not age appropriate questions?
I would say my first grader wanted to tell her class about her adoption. And as an adoptee, I held her back. And the reason why was because I did not want her standing in front of a class. And she is an extrovert, never met a stranger, confident in ways beyond me. She's definitely a born leader. I didn't want her standing in front of the class with the kids asking things that she didn't know the answer to. And my mom heart hurting from afar that it made me think she hadn't even thought of. And I have a really good mentor in my life who's been a friend to me who said for her daughter, who was 12 at the time, that's her story to share. That was her answer. And if she decides later on that she wants to share the details, she can. And she taught me how to protect my kids before they were ready. So I would offer that. Maybe the age isn't a number, but you know your child. And if they're shy, if they're an introvert, which I was, having adults or other kids sit there and pepper them with questions is really, I remember that. And I'm headed into my 40s.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something that as adoptive parents, we don't understand those kind of situations until we're there. And I know especially that, going back to something you said earlier, that word real can be such a trigger for us and for our kids, as you get both sides of the coin. So as an adoptive parent, if your kids were to hear something about their quote real parents, that would really sting. And I'm sure for you as a kid, hearing that really stung too, because those were your real parents,
Yes, it is. And it's your first, because I had a stable home life, I know that's not the case for everyone. It's your first really eye-opening experience into brokenness. And then, already in my daughter's class, there's divorce, there's separation. So there's some hard grown-up things that they've encountered. But asking where your real parents are, what's a child supposed to say? I didn't know. Because you just said, those were my parents. So I would encourage, and this is totally my opinion, and how we handle it in our home, I am quick to step in and always answer for my kids. I don't think they're ready.
Gotcha. So what do you say when you answer for them about their, real parents?
No one's asked that because I kind of intervened for someone to say that. But if they said that to us about our children, I would say they're elsewhere, first of all. And they made a choice and made a plan to ask someone else to take care of them. I guess it depends if it's a kid asking me or an adult asking me. I'm more eloquent, I guess, in the moment. What are you thinking? If a child asks?
I don't know. I think I was thinking both. I think maybe in my head I was picturing a child asking that, because that seems a little bit more blunt, like a kid would say that without knowing that it was not okay.
Well, I would say I'm her mommy and this is her daddy. God gave them to me. Our son has a very severe speech delay, and we've begun to encounter, whereas before kids would play side by side, now it's what's wrong with him. Some kids are fine with it and never notice, and other kids get really question him on the playground or in the situation. I am just mama bear, quick to step in and say, you know what? God's given him other gifts and he understands everything you're saying, and we have to encourage him and speak life around him. So I would say the same thing. They say, "Where are your real parents?" I'd say, we are her parents. This is her daddy and I'm her mommy. And God has given us to each other. And my husband is so amazing. He constantly tells me I don't need to go into such detail. Sometimes I get a little long-winded or defensive. They're just kids, he says.
Yeah, well, and I totally get that. But at the same time, I think that, that's the purpose of these episodes. These conversations need to be happening. And I think that people are genuinely afraid to have them, especially, for lack of a better term, especially white people. I think we're so afraid to ask those questions or to have these hard conversations. And on that note, I wanted to, let's talk a little bit about culture. And I'm really excited that you have two different perspectives. So you can speak more to, Asian culture in general, but specifically Korean culture. Did your parents do anything specifically to, to surround you with that culture growing up?
They really didn't, not for their lack. So my dad has traveled the world on missions trips, and my stepmom, who came into my life in junior high, lived in Japan, and she's a military kid. So our Christmas table, Thanksgiving table was definitely a melting pot. That being said, I would say one of the best things that I think and we're a different generation now, white parents of minority children could do is to make adult friends of that child's race. And if you're uncomfortable doing that, imagine what that would be like for your child. I read a blog post recently about white parents who had a black child and how they felt challenged to go to a black church, and it stretched their comfort zone. They were uncomfortable, and they really thought about, what does that mean for our child? This child's being raised in a white church around all white people, which was my experience. How can we not step foot into that world? Yeah. And I'm sure it's comfortable.
That's powerful, though. That's a powerful thought. And so that was your experience. Did you feel uncomfortable, or did you just learn to get used to it?
You don't get really used to it because it's a constant defensiveness. Even now as an adult, when my parents come to visit, everybody assumes they're my in-laws. It's something that the child will live with, and the parents, are part of it, but the child's the one that's going to be questioned. If you have a minority child or a different race child in a white family, this is going to continue on into when they have grandkids. And so, it's present. It's not like it's something that goes away.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important thought, though, is, I don't know. I think that, I want to think that that's kind of the old way of parenting as adoptive parents, is that we just we think we're integrating, quote, our kids into just the way that we live our lives instead of taking them to where they're most comfortable. And so I think that that's a powerful narrative to say that it never goes away. It's never comfortable. Because just in our human nature, I think that we would want to think that it would. So I'm so glad you said that.
And another thing that is helpful to me as an adult, but would have been helpful to me as a child, is we were not friends with other families that had adopted children. And my husband and I are intentionally, and it's actually just been a blessing, different situations that have come into our lives. And our children know, they're adopted, they know mommy's adopted, and they know, oh, so-and-so on this family's adopted. It's not just like puppies. Like when I was little, like puppies were adopted. Like you didn't know other children. I think that is a huge gift you could give to your kids, is to become friends with families who have other adopted children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love that just adoption support networks and adoption Facebook groups and everything else are becoming more and more popular for that reason. So what would you say specifically? Just since you are South Korean, what would you say to a parent of a child that is, a parent of a child that is from an Asian country? How would you specifically tell them to befriend people, not just adoptive parents, but parents of kids that are like them, or parents that are like them?
I just saw a wonderful video, and I cannot think of what state it was in, where there's a Korean church that is specifically opening their doors to like monthly potlucks and mentorship type programs for, it was all white parents in the video, but white parents to bring their kids in. I think that would have been uncomfortable for me as a child, but I would have benefited from it.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so cool.
I wound up moving to Seattle, Washington, which is, hugely diverse, strong Asian population. And then you're kind of caught between two worlds as an adult because everybody has assumptions about you, Asian and white, and both misunderstand the other. For example, you go to an Asian home and they expect that your parents are Asian and that you got your degree in whatever, science, engineering. I've encountered that specific assumption before, and it's just hard,
Were you ever misunderstood by those parents who were confused when you didn't adhere to whatever Asian culture that they, thought you were or understood you to be?
I would say not so much the parents. And we even had Korean friends in Alaska who were so loving and very understanding of the situation, but you just feel kind of like an outsider in both situations at times,
Yeah, absolutely. So
I tell I would encourage other parents, and for myself and my husband also, to definitely visit places that are and meet other families that have adopted children in your child's culture.
Yes.
That's a gift.
Oh, I love that. So shifting gears a little bit to your own kids, what are some of the things that you actively do to protect their culture and protect who they are?
Well, we proudly encourage and tell them about their heritage. They have Alaska Native blood, and so that is a proud, rich, strong tradition, and we celebrate that. We're actually headed up there this summer to take them back, but they know exactly where they came from and who they are, and we're very proud of that in this home.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And so I know that, speaking of kids, and you have already mentioned that you definitely can become a mama bear, and I think that every mom should be, but I love it when other moms talk specifically about that. So I know that before we had talked about parents encouraging their kids that it's okay to be different. It's okay to look different, and that should be celebrated. And, in theory it should, but that's not the world we live in. And do you mind talking about that some too?
No, I'm glad you remember that. It is hard to be different, and asking a child, in a social situation, if they look different, smell different, are different, that's okay. I would really encourage parents to instead say, I'm sorry that made you sad, or how did that make you feel? Can I pray with you? I felt like that before too. Words that affirm that insecurity in them and acknowledge it, and never ever try to wish it away, because what they're going through is a very stressful situation. And into adulthood, I didn't realize some of my type A, controlling, defensive behaviors probably stem from that very situation of always having to be alert, always having to give an explanation, defensively explaining, no, this is my dad, this is not my husband's dad,
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious if you could go into some more depth about that feeling. You know, you've mentioned just being on the defensive. What is that like as a person who just has to constantly live aware?
Thankfully, my relationship with Christ and becoming a believer has given me an identity that is so rock solid. It definitely supersedes any insecurity that I have. However, I'm part of this really big Korean adoptee Facebook group, and people have really manifested their adoptions in really different ways. And some people just, I would say across the board for us, we all identify, like if you were to ask us to describe ourselves, that's going to be one of the top 3 things we say. I'm adopted. I'm an adoptee. I'm a transracial adoptee. I'm a Korean adoptee. And we just kind of have to get that out there because otherwise it's confusing to people.
Yeah, I think that, and that's something that as white people, we don't understand in our society. And, I don't know, that's the point. That's kind of the point of these episodes is I want us to be aware. I want us to have these understandings because we're raising the future generation. And as parents who adopt kids from other races and other cultures and other ethnicities, that responsibility is even greater because we can't raise them the way that we would just other white kids because that's completely disregarding the struggles that they're going to have and the identity crises that they may have in the future. And so
exactly, I think parents, and my husband's so good at this. I think we really try to be intentional to affirm their feelings. My parents, I think, at times, I mean, I would have to ask my dad to speak on this, but were confused by how hard it was for me sometimes. Like, I was so loved at home. I think it's easy. And now that I am the parent, you love them with all your heart so much that you think that could be enough, but it's not. You need Jesus too.
Yes, we can.
And they're going to have to work out some of that on their own. It's not a problem to be solved. It's an issue that isn't going away. Like I said, now it's, I'm an adult and they're the grandparents come to visit and it's still, people are confused.
So let's dive into that a little bit. When is it not our job as parents to fix it or to be there or to step in? When is it our job to let something play out in regards to race issues?
Such a good question. One of my dearest friends that I left in Seattle excels at that. And she is someone who, instead of trying to fix it, is sympathetic and caring and loving. And her approach, it's kind of like sometimes you hear that in a marriage, a husband tries to fix a problem and a woman just wants you to say, I hear what you're saying. I understand your frustrations. I would say that approach can be, depending on your child's personality, really helpful and really loving. And I think all kids are different too. I mean, when I do read my Korean adoption Facebook group, some kids, even ones that wind up in the South and they are Korean with a Southern accent, people are so confused. They cannot figure it out. Rejoice in that. They're proud of that. They are proud of that side of their heritage. And so I do think maybe introverts and extroverts process differently. Of course, your home life will affect that,
Yeah, for sure. So, Melanie, growing up, as you go through these different points in your life into becoming an adult, what are the things that keep coming up, that keep happening for you, that keep reminding you of where you came from?
There's definitely different milestones that come up beginning, in my earliest memory, so preschool or elementary, of milestones that you wind up having to grieve, because that grief, the loss of the ease of just looking like the family you're with isn't going away. And so I kind of referenced that earlier, like when the grandparents come to visit and you love them and you're so excited, but it's not your grandparents. Someone assumes it's your husband's parents. And so that kind of rises at different stages. And you have to, as the adoptee, you have to go through the stages of grief with that. First, you're like, why can't it be a little bit easier? And then it's, okay, it's just always going to be like this. But it's hard because it's not going away. these are your parents. You're not the same race. It's always going to be like this. It just becomes easier to deal with as you get older, but it still shows.
It's like a wound that just keeps, being scratched or nicked or whatever.
Yes, and it's not as painful as an adult because you've dealt with it at this point for 30 whatever years, so you know how to handle it. But it definitely still, you just wish it was, you love them so much, you just want them to be your parents that look like you, but they're not. And others are going to continue to point that out.
Yeah, and that ties in with what you said, just that you never get used to it.
It's definitely part of your identity.
Yes, I think that's so important for adoptive parents to understand. So what do you think, what are some of the most, goodness, I don't even know how to phrase this in a polite way. What do you think are some of the most hurtful things that have specifically happened, or the most hurtful questions or comments or stereotypes that you've gotten both as an adoptee and as an adoptive mom?
Yes. My husband just reminded me. So someone has asked if I was the nanny because I mentioned earlier I had a little brother and sister. When I was little, I specifically remember kids saying, "Why is your skin so brown?" And your parents aren't. They were confused by that. My children actually look just like my husband and I, so we don't encounter them getting questions about their looks.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's we didn't know. I mean, you don't know, and we didn't know because they weren't born. We had a private adoption we were there throughout the pregnancy, so we had no idea that was going to be the case. But I would say I would encourage parents to speak up for their children. If people start to question you in a store, a church, whatever, and your child's listening, you need to be aware of that. And you need to kibosh it so politely. Even if you're the kindest, softest heart, you could say, "We're not comfortable discussing that right now," or, "I'd be happy to discuss that with you at a later point." If it's just nosiness and your child's sitting there like a puppy dog and someone's discussing. I used to tell everybody everything, and I never liked it.
I think that's such a great perspective, though, because as an adoptive parent, and I think we talked about this before when we spoke, but it's so obvious with my kids that, either one of them's a friend hanging out or we're adopted or something, because they couldn't have biologically been related just because of age is overlapping. And so it's so hard as a parent to know how to address those things without just immediately being like, "He's adopted,"
Yeah. Oh, yes. And that, if that was me in that situation as the child, I have been thankful. I feel like the Lord knew I needed, it would have been very hard for me to have, if my parents had biological children and then me as the only minority in the home. I think that I would have really struggled with that. The fact that I was their only child and probably more indulged than not helped me. And so if you especially have a mix of biological and adoptive children and your child's the only one of a different race, I think that's a double whammy, because the whole family is related to each other and looks like each other, and then there's you. It's a feeling of isolation, and it doesn't mean your parents don't love you. It's not a reflection, and we know that as parents. I love that quote online that says, "I have adopted and biological children, I forget which are which." Because of the love. That's how we feel, and I get that. So maybe an additional sensitivity towards that.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing my husband reminded me of is the incessant conversation about who looks like who. That was so hard for me, even as a high schooler, when my brother and sister came along. That is a natural, part of biology that we sit and discuss endlessly, the traits in a family. He has her eyes, she got his hair. But when you're adopted, you're never going to be a part of that. You're going to sit there at family gatherings, and it comes up frequently, more than you would think, So we are intentional in our home because of my sensitivity. My husband is amazing about that, to really try to not go on and on. And we do have a biological child.
Yeah. And I have to say, on a related note, I love that you have brought up a couple of times that your husband's reminded you of things. And that just shows that you have made this such an open conversation in your household. And I think that that's so great, because that shows that you have processed these things, and that these hurts were not just left as, as buried emotions for you. What do you think that was attributed to?
My husband helping encourage me, you mean?
No, I just, what do you think it was attributed? I'm sorry, that was probably a weirdly phrased question. I just meant, what do you think caused you to process these things and fully understand in a way that even your husband can remind you of feelings that you had growing up, surrounding these issues?
I had such a stable home life. My dad loved the Lord with all of his heart, still does to this day. I went to the same school and an amazing college and was given every opportunity. And so all of that, I am so blessed with my life, my husband, my children, my family, that I don't feel I can sit and wallow in the fact that I'm adopted. I actually celebrate it, because I've seen a whole nother side of life and humanity that I would have missed without this journey. Another side of God's heart, totally. Yes. That being said, my husband is really good about, and I as a team, to encourage others that this is not your story as the parent. This is the child's life.
Yeah.
So when don't let others dictate what you share, when, how. And don't let the child be pressured, too soon. It doesn't matter if they're a different race. It doesn't matter if it's obvious. You have to discern as time goes on their comfort with you telling the story. And what that looks like. And a lot of times in adoption, there's going to be sorrow. That's how this all happened. There's grief and loss and a reason that the child was adopted. So do we really want to go down that road in front of them?
I apologize. I'm taking the moment to write down that quote, because it's so good. Don't let others dictate how much you share about your child's story. So good, Melanie. Thank you.
Hard. I think that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. It's I think that we as parents especially feel that social pressure, and much worse when it comes to a transracial adoption. We also, even if we don't feel like some sort of white savior complex, we get that from others, and that sucks, to be blunt. And it's so hard to overcome that. I'm sure that, I don't know.
I would say that is such a good point. Yes, as an adoptee, and that is the case, I read online in my forum that you do grow up with this sense of people make you feel as if you should just be indebted, that you were saved out of whatever, when really everybody's born into a family, biological or not. And there are some messed up biological families out there who don't lose custody of their children.
Yeah.
So biology should not determine whether you're thankful which family you end up in. Absolutely. And we need to tell our adopted children that they were chosen. I like that very much. I believe that too.
Yeah. And even as a parent of white adopted children, people definitely put you on a pedestal that you didn't ask for. And you are like, that's not my life. That's not how I feel. And it's so hard to navigate those things, or to know what to say, because on the one side, it sounds like a compliment, but on the other side, it does not feel like a compliment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So if you were to sum all this up, what is some advice that you would offer to both? You can start with kids that are in this situation. Maybe it's an adopted kid who has white parents, who they're a minority and they're struggling with some of these things. They're living aware, as you said, just constantly on the defense. What advice would you give to them?
The advice I would give is, in today's world of social media and connection and blogs, to find other families with adopted children. I think that would have meant the world to me. I did not know other adopted children growing up at all. And it's isolating. I think to have other families that resemble yours, not necessarily because it's white minority, but just adopted in general, is a gift. And we are trying to be intentional about offering that to our children. And the best part about it is it's been a blessing to us because we love the parents. And you have an instant connection with other parents if they've adopted children. It's awesome.
Yes. And
It's
that's
not
actually
go find these families. It's fun.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite things is just making friends with people where you can go to their house and not worry or not feel misunderstood or not feel like you have to explain yourself or your children at all. It's so comforting, you know?
So it's a win-win for the adults and the children. But I think for the children specifically, you know, our kids know more adopted because they know me and they have an older sibling and they have each other and they have so many friends. That's more than I had in 20 years.
So that would be the advice you would offer to kids and to adults, to parents and to kids, or just to parents?
Definitely to parents. I would say to kids, advice is hard for kids, but I would affirm their feelings and don't remember that it's not your story, it's theirs. So I would tell my children, this is your story, this is your information, and they're so little right now, but my husband and I have been teaching them if something feels yucky or makes you feel sad, you don't have to talk about that. You don't have to share that. You come find mommy and daddy and we'll help you. When they get older, we'll see.
Yeah.
Where it's, I was never an oversharer, and I think my oldest, we'll see. She turns out to be. I admire that in her already. God has given her a different personality than me. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, God likes to do that, huh?
Yeah, he does.
What I've struggled with most about having a child from different ethnicity is balancing, respecting her birth parent's culture and making sure that we are attentive to that, but also not making a big deal out of it to highlight my child's differences. So I want to make sure that we celebrate the differences, but we don't make a big deal about how, you know, her ethnicity is different than ours, because we don't want to focus on differences.
Hey everyone, welcome, and I want to introduce you all to Adriana Gomez Barajas. How you doing, Adriana?
I am doing great, thank you.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I have been here in the United States for 30 years almost, and my parents brought me when I was very little from Mexico, so it has been, you know, I guess by now I have lived here way more my life than I've lived in Mexico, but yet I am still very connected to my roots and my heritage. I am currently a real estate agent. I've worn many hats throughout my professional career. One of my biggest passions is working and helping nonprofits. So I'm very happy that you invited me to do this today.
That's awesome. I love hearing that you like to work with nonprofits. Obviously, that's a big part of what we do as well. So that's really fun to hear. And so, yeah, you've been here for a while, and you're married, you have kids, which is really fun. And I love that you are taking a minute to come on the podcast and just talk to us about how we as adopted parents can partner with you guys in helping our kids as adopted parents honor their culture and their heritage and where they come from. And so they just thank you so much. And I wanted to ask you, how is adoption in general viewed in the Mexican community?
From my experience, sadly, I don't see it as something that is a priority. You know, a lot of, obviously, being Mexican is still that very macho culture where, you know, it has to be your kid, otherwise it's not quite your, you know what I mean? It's
Right.
not viewed as, I guess, as, I don't even know what the word would be. People do adopt, but it is not as often as it is here in the United States, sadly. However, the people who do adopt, realize that what a great blessing it is
For sure.
for them and for their family.
So, yeah, and I mean, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But do you think that, how do you think that Mexicans view it when white people adopt Mexican children, or just Hispanic children in general?
It has been my experience that, I think it is very flattering for many of us, just like when you try to speak our language, when you try to speak Spanish, it makes us feel so good that you try to speak our language. So when you adopt a child that, that is from our culture, I believe it's a flattering thing, that you're actually almost like an acceptance thing, I mean, it's always about, wow, they're so open to not only, adopting a child, but adopting from another culture in our culture. So I believe that it is something that it's admired by the people.
I think that's great to hear. And I love that you said that about speaking the language, because I always feel like I am completely butchering it. I have a neighbor that only speaks Spanish, and every time I talk to her, I'm just like, sí, gracias. Like, I have no idea what to say, and I always feel like I'm insulting her, but she's
Keep trying. Trust me, she appreciates it. Keep trying. It's always, it always makes you feel so good that somebody else is trying instead of you always trying to speak another language. It's good to see that other people.
I love it. That's awesome. Okay, so yeah. Oh, I love it. That's hilarious.
Speaking of language, I think as adoptive parents, that would probably be one of the best things that you could do for your child, because if it's a child that is from whatever ethnicity it is, but we're speaking Hispanics today, so if it's a child that is Mexican or, Puerto Rican, whatever it is, I believe that one of the most important things that as a parent, as an adopted parent can do is making sure that that child knows his or her roots. Because even though it's in this other family who may be white and, very welcoming to him or her, they are never going to be, once he grows up or she grows up, he's still going to be Mexican or Puerto Rican or whatever, regardless of the family. So once he goes out in the world, if he doesn't have that connection with his culture, I believe the struggle is going to be difficult, because, we are such a diverse world that, and sadly, when you grow up, especially if you look Hispanic, people assume you know Spanish.
Yeah.
So stealing the culture and the language, you just, you've done a whole bunch more work than, just adopting the kids. So.
Absolutely. So let's dive into that. What are some things about the Hispanic culture or Mexican culture that you feel like adoptive parents should definitely know, aside from the language thing? And I think that's a really important point. I had a roommate in college that spoke Spanish, and at one point she had a friend over or we had a mutual friend that was over, and they would speak Spanish, and I had no idea what they're talking about. And I finally asked them, I'm like, dude, do you think you guys could speak English so I can be included in the conversation? And they said to me, if you were to go to another country and you found someone else that spoke English, do you not think that you would want to speak English with them just to remember, your homeland and, remind you of home? And it just blew my mind, because I totally would. And I didn't even think about it like that. And so I love that you brought up the language thing, because that's such an instant way to make kids feel comfortable in your home. And if you don't speak Spanish, maybe bringing friends that do around, you know what I mean?
Exactly. At least, so I believe, obviously as children, we don't see differences, and I'm sure you've noticed that, kids don't see race, they don't see color, they don't see anything. But as you grow and you go into the world, things change. I can tell you from experience with my daughter. My daughter, when we raised her, we're surrounded by mostly Caucasian friends, mostly Caucasian kids in school, mostly Caucasian everything. Until she got to high school, she started, the school was more diverse. So therefore, she was able to meet Hispanic friends and, meet other kids that, assimilate her. That's when she realized what she was missing. And see, I'm Hispanic, and I made the mistake, I guess, so of not making sure that she realized that to make that connection with somebody who's like you, whose parents, maybe raise the same thing or think the same thing, or someone who looks like you, someone who speaks like you. I believe that is so important, and that's why I'm so glad that there's people like you and Michelle who want to be such great adoptive parents and make sure that you're doing everything possible to make sure that child is not only having a better life, but having a better future.
Definitely. Well, I mean, thank you. And I think that as adoptive parents and just as parents in general, this, you're a parent, like we're just trying our best and sometimes it feels like taking shots in the dark, and figuring it out as we go along. But I know that as adoptive parents, when you get children from another ethnicity, that's like holding the most fragile thing in your hands. You want to take care of that and you want to treat it with such care and honor who they are and raise them, like you're saying, raise them to know who they are and to know their culture and where they came from. So, like I said before, but, what do you think that what are some things that you think adoptive parents should definitely know about the Mexican or just greater Hispanic culture?
That's such a hard question, because obviously, depending on the country that the child is from, if the child is from Mexico, I think, knowing, depending on the child's age when you adopt it, obviously, if it's a baby, it's going to be a lot different than if you adopt a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. One of the most important things is probably finding out what that kid did with his family. Every culture has its own traditions. There are many things that I do as a parent that I don't even realize, that I do it because I'm Mexican. I just do them because my parents did them, and probably their parents did them, and we just continue to do those things. Religion is very important in the Mexican culture. So if it's a child that has been a little older, it's probably been brought up in a religion environment, where, probably they go to church and, most Mexicans are Catholic. It's starting to change, but it's still most Hispanic countries are still Catholic. So, I believe all of those little things would make a difference as far as depending on the age of the child. What has that child been exposed in his or her culture at the point that you are adopting it? When it's a baby, obviously, you can just try to expose them to as many things as possible. We are very lucky to live in the area that we live because it is so different than the rest of the country, of the areas that I lived in. It is so diverse. There are so many things where you could actually take your kids and have them be part of that culture that they came from and still be part, still participate, still learn, still feel like a sense of belonging. So I'm not sure if I'm giving you what you're asking me.
No, definitely. I think that completely answers my question because you're talking about just that what built the foundation for the child. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Those things that set us off in life. And when you take those away, sometimes it's hard to, you're taking away that foundation just to make that comparison. If you take the foundation away from a building, it's going to crumble. And if you take the foundation away from a child, what do you expect to happen, Of
course. And, even if you don't have, like I said, even a child who has been adopted from baby and is raised by Caucasian parents, it's never felt. There comes a point, and there's been many, many studies of people who are Hispanic, who live in this country, and who were never always tried to fit in the Caucasian culture, right? So all my life, I don't speak Spanish. I'm not, I don't see myself different than anybody else. I'm, I guess sort of considered Caucasian. However, when they get older, there are so many more issues because you don't quite fit in anywhere. You don't fit in with the Caucasian culture because you obviously don't look like them. And then you're not accepted in the Hispanic culture because you never learned the basics of your culture. You never related to that. So there's been so many studies of how more successful you can make a child when you instill in them how important is to appreciate your culture, your nationality, where you came from, who are you as a person, and embrace it and make them feel like it's not something that is going to make them less than, but actually add to the person, who actually embrace the language, to actually embrace your culture, and how more proud that these parents who are not even from my culture took me in and raised me, with all of these values. So I just feel that it would never hurt that child to become aware of where he or she came from.
Yes, and I love what you're saying. I think that it's so important for the parents that are listening to hear is that and I want to highlight it. I know I'm repeating what you've said, but I love that you're saying, when these children grow up, like when they're children, what you said earlier was that, children don't see race. They don't see a difference. And often they're not treated differently when they're very little until, maybe they get to junior high or high school. But when they get to that age, they're still Hispanic. They're still, they're still Mexican. They're still Puerto Rican. They're still whatever it is. And they're going to be seen as different. And so to give them those foundations, even when it doesn't feel necessary, when they're little, it's going to be setting them up for a better future. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Definitely. Always. I think that. I feel like I was telling you with my daughter, the same thing. Obviously she lives with us, so she feels Mexican, obviously. However, it to me, the sense that she feels so proud of who she is, to be able to defend that. Sadly, we live in a world that lately, more than ever, people are okay with telling you what they think about other races. You need to equip your kids with tools to defend themselves against all of these things that are coming to them, because can you imagine if you raise a child, you raised him to be completely accepted in your family, completely accepted in their environment. But then when they go to college or wherever it is that they go when they grow up, and they don't have those tools to defend themselves, that would be so detrimental to that child or to that person, because I never knew I was different. How can I defend myself? I never knew I was different, just now I'm being told I'm different. So
absolutely. So let's get into some of those harder things. What are some of the ways that specifically Mexican people are viewed and or treated in American culture? What are some of the things that these adoptive parents can expect for their children? Some of those hard things that they can expect.
Some of the things that they need to be prepared of. And like I said, sadly, we live from when I've been here, I can tell you, I moved here when I was 14. They moved us from Mexico straight to Nebraska. The reason was, trust me, it was horrible because here we are, coming from, especially as a teenager, it's when it's the most important time. All your friends, making all those connections were so important. Well, at that point, my parents wanted us to learn English. And so the whole goal was to go to somewhere so we can live for a few years. We could learn English and we were going to go back. Well, here we are 30 years later. Yeah. Obviously, that did not happen. And so, however, the point was we could go to Chicago and be with, obviously you always move to somewhere where there's some kind of relation, where my aunt lived, or we could go to Nebraska where my uncle lived. Chicago obviously was not a good option because there's so many Hispanics. So therefore the goal was to learn English. You wanted to go somewhere where nobody could speak your language. So going to Nebraska and having such a small, our community and where we moved to, I remember going to church and even at the high school, there was one table probably with about maybe 14 Hispanic kids. And that was about it. Everybody else was Caucasian, I feel that one of the hardest things, and I'm sure the kids at my high school didn't do it on purpose, but because they didn't know who, obviously we are all new to their community. They didn't know how to accept us, how to embrace us. But the isolation that happens, in those instances, it truly, especially for teenagers, you wonder, okay, how am I so different than them? Even though you're different, you still don't understand why you're not accepted. So probably one of the biggest things is that, that you are not, they're always going to see you different. And it comes a point in your life when, it doesn't matter, but you need to learn to be secure of who you are as a person, of your ethnicity, and then grow from there, I guess. More than anything, the acceptance piece, it depends on the area. It depends on where you're at. Here in Northwest Arkansas, we're very lucky. We're so diverse, and our kids can grow up seeing different things and growing up with so many cultures around them, which, how lucky is that for our children?
Absolutely. Yeah. I apologize. I'm kind of processing everything you just said. I think that that's a really important thing to note, just that it does depend on where you live. And I know that in the South, specifically maybe in the middle South, there's definitely a greater Mexican community. And I do think that's great for our kids. But you still face racism, you still face stereotypes. And I know that that's got to be so hard. And what tools can we give these white parents who are not used to experiencing those things to walk their children through them?
I believe one of the best things that as a parent adopting a new child, it's actually learning about the culture, learning about that child's culture. I think what you are doing is a great step, trying to get to associate kids and figure out where do we connect. We are very lucky, like I said, to be in an area where there are so many things. And, obviously in Springdale, there are so many activities that are geared to both the Caucasian and the Hispanic community, participating in those things and seeing people like them and with families like them, because, there is a lot of adoptive families, which is wonderful. I think that gives the child a sense of, what, I'm not that different. Look, my mommy is white, but that's okay. Look, so-and-so's mommy is white, and that's wonderful, because I am sure there's going to come a point, sadly, when they realize race is a thing. So,
absolutely, and I know that could be so so hurtful to a child who's not used to experiencing that in their home, especially, and then they realize that the world isn't as kind and friendly as they maybe thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and I love that we are talking about a lot of, these parents learning about the culture and surrounding them by people that look like them. And those are all amazing things. But I know that food is also a really big deal. So, do you agree? Would you think that maybe serving them food that they might be used to or food that they could connect to would be a good way to honor their culture and heritage?
Well, definitely, especially depending on, like I said again, depending on the age that you are adopting that child. If that child comes from a family, if that child was with his birth family up until he was 6, 7, 8, 9, he's going to be used to a whole different diet than you are. So therefore, learning those things, learning what he or she likes would be probably very important, because that's what they've done, especially if it's an older child or even a teenage child. Those things are going to be something that he or she grew up with. One of the things that happens in the Mexican culture that doesn't happen here is our times to eat are very different. Most people, once they come here to this country, they acculturate themselves to the times. However, if you come from Mexico, they eat breakfast in the morning. And then at 2:00, that's when you eat supper, lunch, whatever. I don't know what you would call it. That is your heavy meal for the day, around 2:00. Most most families, even some families who have been here for a long time, still do the lunch dinner at 2 o'clock. So, and then at the night, it's just a light, snack, not really anything heavy. So very different times of eating. So your child may be used to eating, like I said, something in the morning for breakfast. And then by 2 o'clock, he or she wants a meal.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine school would be a really hard transition for them in that situation because, I mean, no school is going to make kids wait until 2 to eat.
To do it that way. Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing to note. I actually did not know that. So.
Yes. In most countries, I know like in Mexico, all businesses will close at 2 o'clock. So everybody can go to, that would be your lunch hour, You can go home, you can eat your lunch or whatever you're going to eat your lunch, and you come back to work at 4 o'clock. Everything opens back up. So
yeah, for sure. And okay, so before we finish out, I wanted to ask you about a couple of just harder things. And we don't have to get it too nitty gritty. But, I know that especially in relations with Mexico, there's just some hard things going on with so many, with the just dangerousness in Mexico. And I know that I've had friends whose families have been worried or afraid, and then also just with our administration. And I know that for kids, especially kids who don't understand fully, their culture or where they come from, but to walk them through these hard things and let them know as parents that we're there for them and that that we're hurting with them. How would you address those situations?
It is such a difficult situation to live in this, like I said again, if you are not a person who's secure of your culture, who's secure of who you are, can you imagine having to deal with all of these things that you see in the media, that you see everywhere, sadly, right now? You don't know how to defend yourself. I also help a lot in the community, and there are kids whose parents are going through so many things and they cannot process it. They feel like they are being personally attacked. They don't even want to get out of their houses because they feel that if somebody sees them, they're going to attack them. They're going to separate them from their parents. It is such a scary world for some of these children. I think one of the best things that you can do for that kid is, I guess, teaching them there's going to be bad and good in everybody, I guess, and knowing that they are going to be safe regardless, especially for adoptive kids. That the separation is always going to be there. So the fear probably will always be there, especially if it's an older child, to make them feel secure that they are not going to be taken away from you regardless, because you just, even I've seen kids who have no reason to be afraid, but they are afraid. They are afraid that somebody's going to come and take their parents away, or somebody's going to come and send them back to their country, even though they have no reason to be afraid of. Some of those things are so difficult, again, because of the time that we are living in, and probably making sure that they know that, a lot of people generalize, and there are just like in every culture, there are good people and there's not so good people and there is bad people. And sadly, we tend to see only the bad and only focus on the bad. And I believe that one of the things that you need to do is just, instill in them that when they are exposed to those things, that obviously the bad things, to tell them, well, yeah, there's some people that are bad, but this is that there's very little of that. Only, sadly, the media focuses on that and doesn't focus on all the other wonderful things that every culture possesses. One of the things that, they obviously, sometimes a lot of people tend to focus on Mexico, and they have such a problem with drugs, and it's so violent, and all of these things that we see. Yeah, I can tell you, I have friends, we go, nothing ever happens. We don't see all of that. It's just in the media, really. Obviously, as long as you are careful, like in everywhere else, just like if you go to New York, you're not going to go to unsafe places where you don't know. It's just the same thing, as long as you're not in that kind of environment, you are going to be safe.
I think that's a really important thing to note. I love what you're saying, just about focusing on the positivity and not, not buying into all the negativity that our American culture likes to push so much.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I think that, oh gosh, it's a good episode whenever I stumble over my words a little bit because I'm still processing what the person just said. So thank you so, so much for everything that you've said in these. And I'm so excited for listeners to be able to hear and learn from what you've shared with us today. So thank you so much, Adriana.
Oh, thank you for having me. And again, like I said, it is admirable, the work that you guys do. Keep going. And oh my goodness, thank you.
So we have 2 boys that we've adopted. They are half brothers. And our oldest is mixed race. And so we've really, I think, have had to have a lot of talks with him just about his identity. And just, he asks questions about, am I white or black? And it's very important to us for him to know that he's both, and not to feel any shame of that. I think another thing is that our oldest, they assume he's our biological son because he is lighter. And that our youngest, they assume that we've adopted from another country. So when we get asked questions, it's never assumed that they are biological brothers from as far as his identity.
You guys, I just want to thank you again for listening. This has been such an incredible season, and I can't wait to really dive into season 3 and start working really hard on it to bring it to you guys in September. I hope you'll join me for that, and I hope you also will check out the other episodes in this season and the first one if you haven't already. I said this at the end of the last episode for part 1 of the race series, but I just want to remind you guys that I am so humbled to have been able to talk to my amazing guests about such an important topic. And I would love to link to them or to point you in their direction if you have any questions or if you wanted to chat or follow up with anything they had to say. I will continue to do my Thursday Facebook Lives throughout the summer during my break. And so I hope you'll join me for those. Remember, sometimes I do my giveaways, and that's always really fun. But I just am so humbled and grateful to you guys for listening and being such a huge part of this dream of mine to have this podcast and to bring this adoption conversation to the forefront and normalize it and fill it with grace for these parents who are struggling. I know I am, and you probably are too. And so I want to be the person that can tell you that you are enough and you're doing a great job. So thank you. Thank you for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I know this stuff is hard, and I hope you found encouragement here. Remember, you are enough, and you're doing a great job. God wants to be at the center of this journey, and He is big enough to redeem all of our mistakes. Don't forget to check out show notes and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.